forensic detectives, really in all of North America, who has always been a defender of the official account of the Kennedy assassination. He supports the Warren Commission findings essentially. Of course, they made a number of errors early on. He does not find them errors of great consequence. Subject to later revision, he's aware of the revisions, but he essentially holds with the original lone gunman Oswald view. He will be, in effect, countered. I'm not sure the extent, because I don't know the full dimension of the man's views, by Professor David Kaiser, joining us by telephone, one of the skeptics about the Oswald scenario. Kaiser is professor of history at Carnegie Mellon University in Pittsburgh, and he believes that the Oswald story is not the right story, apparently. I don't quite know the extent of that. We'll find out as he gets on the program. We'll talk about the JFK assassination 25 years after in the noon hour. Then at 1 o'clock, you look at the bullet and what the bullet is supposed to have gone through. The first bullet, not the one that ultimately killed Kennedy, but the supposedly first bullet. First bullet to strike people. There was apparently another bullet that was fired initially that struck nothing. It's hard to believe it went through Kennedy and then Connolly, smashing bone and going through two separate bodies and emerging essentially unscathed.
Yeah.
He's been very eloquent on that, Dr. Weck. Yes, I'm sure he is.
Sir Weck was very eloquent upon myself when I was in Pittsburgh, and if he had had his druthers, he would have shot me. Single bullet or double or triple.
Tough man.
Listen,
some of which have been answered, like the number of shots that were fired. The acoustic evidence turned out to be a cold trail, as I guess you know.
Mm-hmm.
You know, that turned out to be nothing. Some very interesting research was done on that. But there are very interesting questions that emerge, and the best of the documentaries that's been done is Nova's documentary, narrated by Walter Cronkite. I don't know if you saw it.
Yes, I have.
It was really good. Didn't answer the questions, presented a lot of questions, presented the official answers to them, some of which were marginally persuasive, others of which were not.
Mm-hmm.
But I must say that I've been re-intrigued by the Kennedy mysteries, and I'm not even sure that today will be the end of it, by the way.
No.
In terms of this program, I mean.
Right.
It's conceivable to me that if I have my druthers, if I have my will, might do something next week on it, too.
Good.
All right.
Look forward to listening.
Thanks for calling.
Okay.
Bye-bye.
Who killed the president and why this was allowed to happen than there were then.
Join us this Saturday night at 8 for a 2-hour look into the Kennedy assassination 25.
One of the nation's most celebrated experts on violent death analyze and confront what is perhaps the nation's most enduringly controversial and still mysterious violent death, the assassination of President John Kennedy, the 25th anniversary of which, I'll get it right, comes up next week. Our guests are Dr. Werner Spitz, the recently retired chief medical examiner of Wayne County, who remains professionally active as a consultant and who has had an intimate role in the investigation of the Kennedy assassination. And by telephone, Professor David Kaiser of the History Department at Carnegie Mellon University, quoted in a news account in the New York Times today as one of the skeptics about the official account of the assassination. Dr. Spitz, welcome back to you. Glad to have you back, sir. Thank you. And Professor Kaiser, welcome to you. Glad to have you on the program, sir.
It's nice to be on the program. Thank you.
Dr. Spitz, by way of identification, by way of credentials, why don't you lay out for us at the beginning here your own role in past investigations of the JFK killing?
I was a member of the Nelson Rockefeller's Committee on Assassinations, and that was in 1975. And there I was the forensic pathologist of a group of 5 people, including a radiologist, a neuropathologist, a ballistic expert, and an attorney. And then in 1978, I was a member of the House Assassination Committee, House of Representatives, and that was a committee of, I believe, 8 or 9 pathologists only, usually forensic pathologists from various parts of the country.
Is it fair to say that you, in both events, in both investigations, came out endorsing more or less the official account, Oswald the lone gunman, not a conspiracy, not other gunmen, not other unproven assistants for Oswald?
Well, it has always been my position that the shots were fired from the back of the president, that they came from the same direction, that is, the 2 shots that hit the president, there's absolutely no reason to believe, in my opinion, that there were any shots fired from any other direction. In other words, I do not subscribe to the theory of a conspiracy. I do not profess to know how many people fired, but there's no reason to believe that there was more than one.
Okay, and as for you, Professor Kaiser, what is your overall view of this, however you want to put it?
Well, I don't think that I have specific disagreements with Dr. Smith, is it?
Spitz, S-P-I-T-Z.
I beg your pardon. On the questions that he specifically referred to and that he has studied in detail. I have studied a lot of the work that's been done in the case, and I wrote a fairly long piece on it 5 years ago, and I don't believe anything new has come up. I have no reason whatever to dispute the medical evidence he referred to, or that the shots came from behind, or for that matter, even that the shots that hit President Kennedy and Governor Connolly were fired by Lee Harvey Oswald.
Let's make clear at this point, and forgive the interruption, that
Sure.
some do dispute it, including a professional colleague in the larger community of medical examiners, Cyril Weck, from your own city, seems to dispute the single bullet theory in terms of what it did to Kennedy and then Connolly. But we'll get to that as we go along.
He does. He hasn't convinced me, and I have interviewed Dr. Weck, but we can get into that later.
Sure.
Now, I would say, though, two things. First of all, there is evidence, although it isn't conclusive, of another gunman. There was eyewitness evidence at the time. Many of the people in the plaza thought that someone fired from the grassy knoll. And there was acoustics evidence developed by the Assassination Committee.
However, that was rebutted.
It has been called into question, and it leaves us with a fascinating puzzle. And in fact, it's somewhat frustrating because if somebody was willing to put up, my understanding is that it's a couple $100,000, although I'm not sure now, we could shed some more light on that puzzle, although it's an extremely complicated business.
Mm-hmm. Okay, I'm going to... Go on, I'm sorry.
The thing that still puzzles me, fascinates me, troubles me, is that there are a great many questions, perhaps unanswerable questions, about associations of Oswald, about Jack Ruby, about his associations, and about possible connections of other parties that have not been resolved.
Now, let's talk about those as we go along here. Our number is 559-1270. Talking about the Kennedy assassination on its 25th anniversary. Again, our guests, historian David Kaiser and medical examiner Dr. Werner Spitz, a man of international reputation who, as you heard, has involved himself as a professional witness in 2 separate investigations of the Kennedy assassination. And we'll have more in just a moment, and we invite your calls again at 559-1270 on WXYT. Dr. Werner Spitz, the internationally prominent medical examiner who's investigated it professionally twice, at least twice, and has thought about it, I guess, for the ensuing 25 years, and has been often quoted about it. Question for you, Dr. Spitz, your colleague, Dr. Weck, whom you respect, because I remember we've talked about him before, you and I, has made very, very strong emphasis on how implausible the single bullet theory is. Now, let's talk about that for a minute. The bullet that initially struck Kennedy, back of the neck, emerges from his chest, makes a zigzag turn, strikes Connolly, on his right side, smashes bone, destroys the 5th rib, emerges and strikes his wrist bone, smashes part of that, winds up in his, right thigh? Is that how it went?
I believe, yes, one of the thighs, that undercollar.
The bullet is pristine, and Wecht, in the recent Nova documentary, points out that all subsequent tests seems to show that bullets cannot accomplish all of those impacts and turns and remain in that condition. That's the first aspect of the so-called magic bullet theory. Also, the finding of it, the provenance of it is weird. Finding it on the stretcher, according to an orderly, a hospital orderly. The roll on the stretcher, not Connolly's stretcher, also seems to suggest hanky-panky. But talk about how a bullet can make those multiple impacts emerge through 2 bodies and still remain in more or less brand new condition.
I disagree.
You disagree with what?
I disagree with the theory that one bullet cannot do this.
Okay.
Let me explain.
Please.
The bullet went into, first of all, it's a high-power rifle bullet of military...
Mannlicher Carcano 6.5 millimeter military round.
Right. And these are, of course, jacketed bullets, very hard material. This jacket served as a jacket for this bullet. Now, this bullet hit Kennedy in the back of the right shoulder, and it went through soft tissues in an upwardly direction and came out of the neck.
In other words, it makes an upward turn once inside his body?
Yes, but it makes an upward turn inside his body, but that's if the body is very stretched out. If the head is down, if the head is turned a little bit, and if the shoulders are relaxed, then it is completely understandable how, in spite of having an upward track, the wound could have come from an upwardly source. So the bullet at that point strikes no bones at all and comes out of the neck in a perfectly understandable course. There are two little fragments of bone broken, of two vertebrae broken in the neck. And I am of the belief that instead of striking those bones, the bullet went very close to them and broke them because they're not very strong bones. And there are little fragments of lead which spewed out of the base of the bullet, which is not jacketed, in its passage along the neck. It comes out of the neck immediately to the left of the midline in the area of the necktie, next to the knot of the necktie. Then it enters Connolly's back and breaks the fifth rib, comes out again, and after, mind you, hitting nothing other than soft tissues again, except for the rib.
Well, the Wecht dwells on the rib, though. Wecht seems to regard the rib as significant impact and potentially damaging impact to the bullet. So he says, and said it very forcefully on the Nova documentary.
A rib is not a very thick piece of bone. It is at the most, I would say, a quarter of an inch in thickness. It's got a very thick, spongy part in the middle. The outside of the rib is very thin and certainly not thicker than maybe a 1/16 of an inch. And I cannot conceive of a rib causing that much damage to a bullet.
All right, so Wecht go ahead, Dr. Kaiser. Jump in whenever you want to.
Actually, my question is about the other bullet, so maybe you want to finish this up first.
Sure, let's finish this up then. Wecht, I mean, has gone the whole complete opposite direction on the impact with the fifth rib.
That's why I'm saying I do not agree
how can you disagree? Forgive me, but outside your professional community, you've got two prominent medical examiners who have a totally different view of the impact of this bullet on a rib. I mean, what's so hard to figure out?
It should not be forgotten that the bullet is not pristine. The bullet
looks pristine.
No, the bullet. I saw the bullet. I held it in my hand. The bullet is flattened, somewhat flattened, in spite of this very strong, very resistant jacket that it has. It is flattened as if hit with a hammer on the lower portion of the bullet, close to the base, which is the area at which there has been some rubbing of the bullet against a firm object. Well, a firm object could be a bone.
Well, let me jump in for a second, because in real life, of course, you always have to compare something to something. And what Wecht is persuasive on is in comparing the so-called pristine bullet, whether it really is, to other test bullets. Test bullets found into goat carcasses, into gelatin, and those that weren't fired at all. Now, those that have, for example, been used on a human cadaver, which Wecht shows in the Nova documentary, are substantially deformed, with much less impact.
Yes,
soft tissue impact.
I'm not aware of those experiments that Dr. Wecht did, but I can tell you that bullets, and as a matter of routine, hard-nosed bullets, that is bullets with jackets, do not get deformed by going through soft tissue. Mind you, we see lots and lots, I saw lots and lots of shooting victims in my 35 years in this profession, both in Detroit and in other jurisdictions.
We'll have to.
They do not get deformed.
Okay, we have to kind of leave this point because we can get stuck on it forever, I guess, and regard it as a professional disagreement. But I want to make the larger point before we break and then move to other bullets that Dr. Kaiser is prepared to talk about, and that is, if you accept the direction in which Dr. Wecht is going, you can't accept Oswald as the lone gunman because it is physically impossible for another bullet, if you accept the direction in which Wecht is going, another bullet to have been fired by Oswald. It means, at the very least, another gunman and a conspiracy to conceal the existence of that other gunman. We're talking about a single-action, bolt-action rifle, which requires not only the chambering of a round by separate action after each round, but also the acquisition of the target picture in a scope. It can't be done in the amount of time that the Zapruder film indicates, which is, I guess, the best piece of physical evidence we have.
I disagree with that, too.
You do, huh?
Yes, because the Zapruder film does not... You see, the first shot when Kennedy is hit is when he is passing behind a road sign which indicates the upcoming freeway.
Right.
And you really don't know when, at exactly the point when Kennedy was hit in the shoulder. You think you know because of the echo. But we know very well that the echo follows the sound and not...
Well, Josiah Thompson, who's a fan of the conspiracy theories and has given evidence about it, suggests that the important evidence is visual. You can see Kennedy reaching for his throat. You can see distortion of his features.
That is true.
Before the sign appears, or just before that.
No, that's not true. You see him with his distorted face when he comes out from the sign. When he goes into behind the sign...
Pardon me, you're right. You're absolutely right.
That's right, yeah.
When he goes into behind the sign, he is smiling and he's waving to people on the right
My
side.
point still stands, it seems to me. You can't get off another shot if Wecht is right, if it was a separate bullet.
If Wecht is right, that's true, but I think it's only fair to point out, Dr. Wecht is a fascinating figure, and he never has been hesitant to speak his mind, but Dr. Stitz, how many people were on the panel with the Assassinations Committee with you and him?
I think there were either 8. Total was either 8 or 9.
Right, and it was either 7 or 8 to 1, was it not?
I think...
So what are the majority rules? I mean,
Well, not the majority, but if you have 7 or 8, 9 qualified people, and 8 of them think one thing and the 9th thinks the other, then...
Well, but it isn't a vote, after all. If one man can argue persuasively, as Wecht clearly does...
Yeah. But you see, David, I'm coming from quite a different point than you are here.
Okay.
It is true that when the Warren Commission report was first issued, the single bullet theory looked improbable. And in a sense, I still think it looks improbable in that it did require a lot of strange things for it to be true. And yet I am persuaded that the Assassinations Committee put that one to rest, and that, in fact, that probably is what did happen.
Well, let's stipulate that it is true, because we got other fish to fry, as I'm fond of saying, and we'll come back to more of the Kennedy assassination story in just a moment with our 2 expert guests after these messages. Surrounding the JFK assassination 25 years later, I say some of the questions because the questions certainly must number in the thousands, and in a commercially crowded 1-hour program, you can only consider a small fraction of them, but we're trying. I hope you understand. Our 2 expert guests, Dr. Werner Spitz, the internationally renowned medical examiner, recently retired as chief medical examiner of Wayne County, still professionally active as a consultant and working with other jurisdictions. And by telephone, Professor David Kaiser of the History Department at Carnegie Mellon University, who is a nationally quoted and nationally regarded investigator in the academic sense into the Kennedy assassination. Our number's 559-1270. Lynn's been waiting for a while to ask a separate question, and Dr. Kaiser will get to the other bullet in just a moment.
Okay.
Here's Lynn from Livonia. Lynn?
Good afternoon. Hi. I'm calling in regards to something I heard several years ago that a great number of the eyewitnesses to the assassination, key people, had died one form of death or another, be it violent or natural, in a certain amount of time after the assassination. Is that true, and does that have any bearing on the conspiracy theory?
Who would like to answer? Dr. Kaiser, how about you? That's
I
one we've been
can
hearing.
give that one a try. it is not as clear cut as the people who have put that forward.
Not nearly.
Like you to believe. It depends on your definition of a person who was in some way involved in the assassination. Again, the Assassinations Committee, which I think did the most thorough and most responsible investigation, concluded that that was a red herring. On the other hand, specifically in dealing with a smaller number of people, there is a book by David Scheim called Contract on America, which is the most cogent argument on behalf of the idea that it was organized crime who killed the president. And he mentions a number of people surrounding Jack Ruby who died not too long after. And now I can unreservedly endorse that book because there were things in it that I had problems with because I was aware of what he was talking about.
Of course, Jack Ruby's world, this is unscientific, but Jack Ruby's world is a world, after all, in which sudden death and violent death and premature death are more common than in the general population. The world of a kind of small-time nightclub operator with admitted or recognized ties to the underworld is a world in which people tend to die soon.
That's true, too.
Too soon.
That's true, too,
right.
Yes.
What about the movie Executive Action? It really wasn't, when I saw it several years ago, I don't think it was very popular in the country. Did certain people in the country try to suppress that movie because it gave people at least something to think about?
I can tell you that I wasn't one of the suppressors. I interviewed David Miller, the director of it, and that was on a program I was doing in Boston at the time. I thought it was rubbish, personally.
Well,
I wasn't impressed with the movie.
Reputable theater, so it wasn't suppressed.
Yeah, no, it showed. It didn't get much of an audience.
well,
Thanks for the call.
Thank you.
Bye-bye. Now, on to your remarks about another bullet. Go ahead, Dr.
I just want to ask Dr. Spitz, since this is one of the first opportunities I've had to ask somebody who really knows what they're talking about the second bullet that struck the president in the head. And assuming that it was the same type of bullet as the one we were talking about earlier, is it not at all surprising for that kind of bullet to have created this massive wound? And as I understand it, and you've seen the pictures, I guess, literally blown away a good deal of the president's head.
Well, the right upper quadrant of the head was more or less demolished.
Yes.
It is not unusual for a high-power rifle bullet to do this. A mistake was made insofar that the back of the head was never shaved. There is every reason to believe that the entrance wound was up towards the top of the head, namely in the area of the cowlick. The hair in that area, due to the peculiar way in which the hair turns, like in a whirlpool,
right,
is a little bit more, the skin is a little bit more visible in that area than in other parts where the hair is combed over.
Right.
That bullet hole looks, if it is a bullet hole, looks very, very suggestive of a regular, usual bullet wound of entrance like we see thousands of.
I see.
It is known, and we have seen this many, many times, that high-power rifles, whereas they cause a lot of damage at the exit, cause a bullet wound of entrance which does not look any different from any other bullet wound of entrance, even from a small caliber handgun.
Okay.
There is...
All right, so the notion that this might in fact have been an exit wound, a bullet fired from the front of Bassey Knoll, has no credence as far as you're concerned.
There's no credence at all. If you had seen the pictures, and we saw, when we went to the archives in Washington, we saw the color pictures that were taken at the time, projected on a big wall. There is really very little doubt that the one injury in the area of the cowlick is an entrance wound.
What happened to that bullet, do you think?
What happened to the bullet, Doctor?
I don't know. You see the...
I got a question about the other bullet. I don't want to get stuck on the pristine bullet, but we've never satisfied, and we won't. This is really a separate question. After weather, though, Dr. Spitz, I do want to ask you, about how the pristine bullet, quote-unquote, was found on the wrong stretcher. What the heck was that about? An orderly swears up and down that it was on not the Connolly stretcher, but a separate stretcher that had nothing to do with Connolly.
I understand.
He's to be believed. What is that?
I don't know how it got there, but I can say this.
I'll tell you how it could have gotten there. I mean,
somebody picked it up and put it there.
Exactly. Why?
I don't know. Maybe somebody saw it, didn't want to keep it, and put it back in the wrong place. I really could only speculate.
Here's the bullet that passed through Connolly. Oh, I better put it back. Where's the stretcher? Here's the stretcher. In other words, an innocent provenance for that seemingly mysterious.
Possibly, but I don't know that I'm in a position of speculating on it. What I can tell you is that, in my opinion, there is really no doubt at all that the bullet, such as the one in question here, could go through Kennedy's shoulder and neck, through his wrist, which has relatively thin bones as compared to the rest of the arm or the hand. And then through the thigh and graze the femur, which is the bone of the thigh, with just being squeezed, if you will, or crushed a little bit at the base without any more damage on the head.
Doctor, you reminded me of something which is the one question I still have. As I've said, I don't disagree with you about this, but there's something Josiah Thompson always mentions which does give me pause. Let me see if I can put it correctly. At the moment, looking at the Zapruder film, at the moment where Connolly must have already been hit, if we're accepting the single bullet theory, I believe you see him still holding his hat in that right hand, where the wrist has supposedly already been hit.
Right.
Does that seem possible to you?
I don't know.
The lack of contemporary or simultaneous effect. It's one of the strongest points that Josiah Thompson makes. Emerging from behind the sign, and you focused it down more narrowly and more concretely, Dr. Kaiser, is a very strong point for the Josiah Thompson scenario.
Well, I don't know if it is or not.
Let's find out. Seemingly, I should put it that way, Doctor.
I seem to remember the hat resting on his lap.
Oh, well,
and
perhaps so.
There is no reason why his hand should be moved away from that area, whether it's holding or not. I don't really know that it is, and I don't know that the shot would necessarily change that. I think the hat is resting on the lap, and I have the recollection that I never took offense at that position. One thing I want to tell you is that the fact that Connolly does not indicate with his face that he is in distress at the same time that Kennedy
is no big deal to you.
Is no big deal to me because if you think back for a minute, when President Reagan was hit by a bullet, he didn't even know that he was hit. He went to the hospital, and they told him that he's hit.
I say to my friends that if you want to test that theory, what you'll have to do is you'll have to shoot 50 people in situations where they're not expecting to be shot and see how long they take.
Or maybe more than that. Maybe in order to make it scientific, 900 or 1,000. That's the usual sampling.
Have an opportunity to run that experiment.
All right, we'll have more in a moment. 42 degrees, weekend weather now with Tom Churchill. The JFK assassination is what we're talking about this hour from the perspective of a historian and a forensic detective, and one of the most prominent in the nation, and Dr. Werner Spitz. By popular demand, we've prevailed upon both of our guests to stay longer than the hour, since there's so many things to talk about here and not enough time in 1 hour to do it, and I'm grateful for the acquiescence of both men in that wish. Here's Chris from Flint now on WXYT. Chris?
Yeah, hi, David.
Hi, Chris.
I'm going to take a completely different direction than one that's been done.
Feel free.
The Lipton book. The best evidence.
Please.
Please, says Dr. Kaiser. Please, he says. Meaning what, Dr. Kaiser?
Well, I don't want to cut the guest off. Go ahead.
Well, looking at some of the different evidence. Number one, the head snap. Okay, going backwards. I'm no physics expert, but it seems to suggest the shot came from the front.
Well, we got Dr. Spitz to help answer that one, too, by the way.
Okay, number two is the FBI agent statements of surgery of the head area. And number three is the switching of the casket. You have the funeral employee from Dallas saying you put the president in a bronze casket wrapped in sheets. Then the Navy officer, I don't think he was a Navy officer, but the naval man talking about taking him out of a gray casket. He was in a body bag. Now, and the brain's never been found either. Now, there's so many different shenanigans that were played with the body. I mean, something has to be wrong here.
Well, maybe something is wrong without there being a conspiracy or a separate scenario involved. That's a possibility that a lot of conspiracy theorists really don't acknowledge. Hanky-panky that has no larger and darker purpose beyond hanky-panky.
Yeah, but it seemed like the Secret Service really wanted to keep a lot quiet. They went back and talked to the Parkland doctors and say, isn't this really what you saw in the emergency room here?
Well, let's take them in order. For one, the head snapping back. Dr. Scripps?
The head snapping back is something which you would expect in a situation like this, even though the shot came from the back, because there is something totally unrelated to physics, where the body goes instantaneously into a position of what is known as opisthotronus, which is a position of tremendous curvature of the backbone of the spine and a forward arching of the abdomen with a backward snap of the head.
All right.
And then occurs the contrary. So I'm not surprised that the head would snap this way.
Switched caskets, missing brain. What's that? Who would want to steal the brain?
Unfortunately, that happens in pathology departments not that infrequently, that brains are, or organs, I should say, are put aside in a bucket, and then later on somebody forgot to put it with the body.
Not a matter of forgetting.
Doctor, was the brain removed during the autopsy at Bethesda Naval Hospital?
No, it was gone. It was, according to the book, it was gone.
No, I'm asking Dr. Spitz.
Dr. Spitz?
Yeah, the brain was examined. The brain was taken out.
What?
Oh, I see.
And the brain was examined. In fact, there are pictures showing the brain. The problem is that if today you try and find the brain, nobody knows where it's gone.
Well, the Secret Service has an ongoing responsibility to safeguard evidence. Where were they?
I don't know that the Secret Service, it may be so, but I don't know that the Secret Service was in the autopsy room guarding the organs.
Right, so
I kind of doubt that. If this autopsy was handled as any other type of autopsy, I realize it's the president of the country and maybe it was handled somewhat differently, but the organ would be placed in a bucket to be fixed in formaldehyde and possibly then forgotten to be placed with the body. There was a lot of things that were forgotten. It should have been done that were not done. So I'm not really that surprised if the brain stayed behind.
What about the surgery of the head area? Were the FBI just mistaken on that?
I don't know that at any point there was surgery to the head.
Well,
there is no evidence to me, in my books, of any surgery to the head.
And anyway, Ariel Breeton's at this end, apparently, from either of our guests.
Okay.
Thanks for the call. More in a moment on WXYT.
Extra, read all about it. MicroStation, your software specialist, is offering big savings this fall. Extra, read all about it.
Oh, here, young fella, I'll take one of those. Let's see, it says this MicroStation has special pricing on a huge inventory of accessories, supplies, and software, including discs, ribbons, disc cases, cables, mice, and paper products. Oh, and now 9 different desktop publishing software programs are all reduced, like the Aldous PageMaker, the software program that gives you everything you need to provide any document from simple forms and financing to sophisticated books and brochures. Oh, and hey, the Panasonic pen.
As far as the ballistic evidence, all the bullets fired, don't they? All the bullets that have been found were shown to have been fired from Oswald's gun, I thought. Secondly, overall, didn't the Congressional Committee in '78 say that overall there was a conspiracy to kill the president? And my two questions are, how was I watched the Nova show the other night. I'd like a little more information on how the acoustic evidence was refuted, that there were 4 bullets that has been refuted. And I wonder what you both think of the book Best Evidence by Mr. Lifkin.
Well, they were. I haven't read David Lifton's book, or Robert Lifton's book. I get those two Liftons confused. Both of them don't think much of it, as I understand it. Certainly, Dr. Kaiser does not. As far as the acoustic evidence is concerned, it remained for what? An Ohio musician to point out that there was a lack of simultaneous pinpointing of the sounds, that in fact the sounds that were recorded occurred after the assassination.
Well, there was something on the tape which certainly seems to point that way, but this is a fantastic puzzle, and it could be straightened out, although it would cost some money, and somebody ought to straighten it out, because on the one hand...
Is that Dr. Kaiser talking? Or?
Yes,
okay.
That's right. Because on the one hand,
the very reputable acoustic scientists and computer scientists who worked on it thought that they had extremely good evidence in the form of what they call acoustic fingerprints that this was a tape of 4 gunshots fired in Dealey Plaza picked up by that motorcycle. And more evidence could be developed on that point.
Well, but the time tracking...
Well, wait a second, though. But here's my point. And more evidence could be developed on that point because they only did the most thorough analysis on the one sound which they were interpreting to be the Grassy Knoll shot. Now, on the other hand, the evidence of this voice on the tape does suggest that the noises that they were analyzing occurred after the shooting. Now,
right.
Something is very wrong. Either their analysis was nowhere near as good as they thought it was, and you see, the Academy of Sciences couldn't really refute their analysis. It refuted part of it, but it let a lot of it stand. And either their analysis is altogether wrong, or there is some other explanation as to how that other voice got onto the tape at that point. Don't ask me what it is, because I don't know. But it is left in the state of an incredible puzzle, and I really wish that somebody would do the additional.
All right, so neither explanation right now is satisfactory. You have an irreconcilable set
That
of
is my feeling
analysis.
about it, yeah.
All right, back to our caller for
Mr. Lipton, why does he dislike that evidence?
Dr. Kaiser, make this quick because I've got to break again.
Yes, I can make it very quick. I'm a historian, and I know a lot of crazy things happen in the world, but not that crazy. And I think that this is the biggest problem in the whole South.
What's so crazy about what Lipton says?
The idea that somebody was prepared at that particular moment on that afternoon to remove the body somewhere and work it over, just that's not the world I live in. And also that, and this was also on the Nova show, the doctors who worked in the trauma room at Parkland saw the photos, which Dr. Spitz also saw in the National Archives, and they said, that's the way I remember his head.
You know, the Lipton theory is that somebody fired into the body later, and to make things look like something they were not.
Yeah.
But you know, that is assuming that forensic pathologists are complete idiots.
Got to break in, guys. We're late on spots. Hold on more in a moment. The end of this hour, but fear not, we'll talk further about the JFK assassination with our expert guests, Dr. David Kaiser and Dr. Werner Spitz, after news. Stay right there. More coming up after news. David Newman here, and we continue with 2 expert perspectives on the John F. Kennedy assassination, whose 25th anniversary occurs next week. Again, our guests are Dr. Werner Spitz, who's appeared as a professional expert in 2 separate investigations of the Kennedy assassination, and by telephone, the historian David Kaiser of Carnegie Mellon University in Pittsburgh, who has made a long-time study of the various assassination theories and is in some measure skeptical about some of them, the exact dimensions of which not entirely clear, but he does not hold with the official view. I hope that in part summarizes where you stand, Dr. Kaiser.
Well, the official view hasn't been proven. Unfortunately, neither has anything else. I would say that the Warren Commission was unable for various reasons to do a thorough job and did not. Not all of them their fault. I would also say that a large body of evidence, circumstantial, hearsay, and other kinds of evidence has been developed suggesting that organized crime may in fact have been behind the assassination.
And why?
Why were they behind it?
Yes, give us the theory.
The theory, as propounded most effectively, I think, by G. Robert Blakey and David Billings, who were the counsel and another employee of the Assassinations Committee, was simply that organized crime was under tremendous pressure from Robert Kennedy.
We know that.
Yes, that in particular, the boss of the New Orleans branch, Carlos Marcello, who I believe is still alive.
And in prison and very much alive, yes.
And who had been deported by Robert Kennedy, although he beat that, was very upset about this. And this is one of the most interesting aspects of Blakey's theory, that the mob felt that John Kennedy was fair game because he had betrayed them and because, as they interpreted it, he may have accepted favors from them in the form of women introduced to him by mob figures.
They thought they had a deal.
Well, yeah.
How about Johnny Rosselli and company as intermediaries for a plot to kill Castro with a phony beard and all that whole thing?
Well, that is a fact. That, in fact, the CIA had approached John Rosselli and I believe Sam Giancana,
right.
Although I don't keep all this straight in my head 365 days a year, to carry out the assassination of Fidel Castro. Yes, and this is what I'm talking about when I say, for instance, the Warren Commission couldn't do a thorough job. They just didn't know about that.
All right.
Or, in fact, one of them probably did know about it. I beg your pardon, Alan Dulles, but he didn't talk about it. Yes, they had done that, and...
Is that to you a more plausible scenario than the one that we are, for lack of a better one, supposedly left with? Lee Harvey Oswald, the flake, the expatriate returned, the man of mysterious background and unstable nature doing all this stuff himself.
Well, I think it is slightly more plausible, but not enough so that I feel I know. And let me explain that.
Sure.
The tricky thing about Oswald is this. There are two very tricky points. On the one hand, he had a number of associations which are suspicious with respect to people he's been identified with. And here's another area where the I don't think, and this was probably largely the fault of the FBI that they were relying on. They did not do that good a job. On the other hand, with one exception, I believe, we have documented how Oswald could have carried out the whole actual crime on his own without any assistance.
Right.
The only exception, which doesn't necessarily prove anything, is that I believe it is true that no one ever could discover how Oswald had gotten the ammunition for his rifle. That doesn't mean he didn't do it himself, but they never found out.
Well, there are other questions perhaps not as strong, and we'll tackle them.
But the key thing, but you see, then the thing you have to explain is Jack Ruby. Now, in a way, you see, you asked the question about the wrong man. If you believe the lone assassin theory, you also have to believe that Jack Ruby went to Parkland Hospital, hung around the Dallas police station the whole weekend, or much of the weekend, I don't mean the whole weekend, much of the weekend, including the night Oswald was arrested, and then shot Oswald in full view of a telephone audience out of his own emotional...
Yeah, and sense of chivalry. That's the way he describes it.
Right.
I got to tell you, Dr. Kaiser, I don't find that implausible. Now, it may be my own predilections and biases in terms of analyzing evidence as just a lay member of the public come into it, but I've never had any trouble at all with Jack Ruby's motivation. Not one whit, not one jot. It seems entirely persuasive to me, and just hear me out for a second.
Sure.
That here is a guy with a kind of a seamy background who regards himself as a kind of knight-errant and really did admire JFK, and may have even heard that he was friendly with mafia types, and that wasn't so bad either, because he was too. At any rate, he will do the great, noble, and shining thing according to his own perverted understanding of chivalry and nobility, and that is to off the man who killed the president and thereby save Jackie all the trauma of a trial and so on.
Well, that last point about Jackie, I think, is one of the weaker...
That's what he said,
parts
apparently.
of your argument. Yes, well, his life had not on the whole demonstrated a great respect for women.
Well, no. See, there we really do part company. Because there's the classic kind of hypocrisy of a not very reputable man. When you think about the psychology of such people, they often do have this sort of duality of nature.
I'm responsible for this as much as you are. We probably ought to stop this because we don't know him and we're both speculating.
Well, yeah, but
I can't prove that you're wrong by any means, but I just don't agree. I think that there's more plausible that Jack Ruby was doing this because somebody had told him.
What you're saying, and then we will bury this, is nightclub owners with mafia connections don't act in a chivalrous way, and I say that's nonsense because there's a typical kind of contradictory nature, the show of chivalry, the show of nobility, and in fact the thuggish nature underneath, which is no contradiction at all. It's part of the same personality, well recognized, well documented. That's my position for what it's worth.
Yes. The thing I have to say isn't relative to the evidence that was spoken of, but it's relative to the film that Nova showed. And I haven't heard anybody mention it, except that I thought I saw it at least. Let's put it that way. What I'm talking about is when they showed they repeated that about three times, I think, during the film. Three different areas, views of the book tower, the grassy knoll, and the fence and everything,
right.
And the sign and the shooting. I could swear that I saw trajectory lines, like bullet trajectory lines. Now, with the speed of the frames going across, the film frames and whatnot, it looked like dotted lines of a different color or a different shade in the film.
Let's understand, you're not talking about the computer-assisted graphics that Nova used.
Well, that's what I'm wondering. If that was actually put in the film or if it was something that was really there that I saw.
Now, no tracer bullets were used. The tracer is a special kind of a bullet.
It wasn't necessarily a tracer, just maybe a reflection, because the speed of the film, the speed of the lens and everything might have picked that up. Because I know, I have known in the past in shooting that real rifle experts, people who can, shoot a hole out of a washer, pitched out and things like that, they get to where they can actually see the trajectory. Even though you can't see the actual bullet, you can see the trajectory like a shadow with your eyes. They shoot with no sights or anything, and because they can see the trajectory, they can be very accurate.
Well, I didn't see what you saw.
I thought I saw something in that film.
How about you, Dr. Kaiser? Did you see it?
I didn't.
No, I didn't see it either.
The book building window down, and also from the other direction.
From the grassy knoll?
Yes.
I'll look for it on the tape if I can find it. Appreciate your call, sir.
There were about 3 times that it was repeated.
Okay, I'll look for it.
Okay.
Can't settle it now. More in a moment on WXYZ. This was looked into the JFK assassination as a professional expert, and Dr. David Kaiser, historian from Carnegie Mellon University, talking about the JFK assassination. The FBI knew about Oswald's presence in Dallas and didn't notify the Secret Service. Anybody, either one of you, with an idea as to why? It looms seemingly large right now. What's that about? Dr. Kaiser, why don't you tackle that one?
I'm not really qualified to answer that. I suspect it was an oversight of some kind, but I don't know exactly what the standard operating procedures for FBI officers were on things like that.
They had him pretty tightly surveilled. Apparently they took pictures of what they thought was him, and this is also mysterious.
In Mexico?
In Mexico, yeah, and it's not
Well, that
Oswald.
was not, but the target of that was not Lee Harvey Oswald. The target of that was anybody who went in and out of the Cuban or Soviet embassies. What I'm saying is, I believe that the FBI has a responsibility to keep Secret Service and local police informed of people they consider suspicious or dangerous. Now, the FBI knew that Oswald was in Dallas, and in fact, they were in a sort of a minor confrontation with Oswald, which they covered up. And this is one of the disturbing things I just reread, actually, this morning in the Warren Commission. That Oswald had been to the office and said, "Stop bugging me and my wife," and left a note for an agent, and they just threw the note away after Oswald was killed. But maybe Oswald didn't fall into the category of the sort of person they thought they had to tell the Secret Service about.
Well, you're bending over real far, it seems to me. And maybe that's an overcharacterization, but look at it from a different perspective. Here you've got a guy who is a former defector, a former self-styled fair play for Cuba person who was engaged in confrontations with others on the streets of New Orleans, a man who has a very, very disturbing background seen just on the surface of it, working in a building on the route of the presidential motorcade, unchallenged, windows open, a couple of windows open at the time of the assassination. It seems nuts just on the surface.
David, it depends on how that office processes this kind of information. I don't know, actually, whether they knew he was working at the depository. I also don't know if they were accustomed to run that kind of a check, which would be a very complex process. I mean, you have presumably some sort of alphabetical list of subversives.
Well, maybe it's
different kinds.
Sure.
And are you really going to take the time to cross-check that with the whole route of the motorcade and check home addresses and check office addresses and figure out where everybody is.
Well, maybe it's not as complicated as that. You're the Secret Service advance man, so to speak,
yes.
and you're securing the route of the presidential motorcade, whatever time lag you have in advance to do it.
Yeah.
You walk into places along the way and you ask, who's this guy, who's this guy, who's this guy, what's his job, what's his title, name, cross-check, call the office. Lee Harvey Oswald, hey, talk to that guy. Lee Harvey Oswald works in the depository. This is the hypothetical scenario.
Yeah, right.
Working in the deposit, that's right where the motorcade will be turning. Get that guy out of there. Secret Service conversation with the FBI, et cetera, et cetera. What's so ridiculous about that?
Well, nothing necessarily, but what I'm trying to get across to you is this is a historical question. The question is, what were the procedures?
Well, yeah, but it's
normally and in this case, and that would be a very interesting thing to know, and it may be that is buried somewhere.
Yeah.
Warren Commission documents or somewhere else.
After all, it's not all that long ago. It's only 25 years ago, which is not a great deal of time. Many assassinations, a number of assassinations had already occurred, and one fairly recently in time, the attempted assassination of Truman.
That's right.
In 1950, not to mention numerous others going back over a century and more. You know, so it's not outside. In other words, we were not a pristine assassination-free nation up until 1963. There was a great deal to give concern, not the least of which the assault on Adlai Stevenson just a month or two before, in the very same city by right-wing extremists on the streets of Dallas.
That's right.
All right. We got to pause again. Our number is 559-1270. We'll have more in a moment on WXYT. With Dr. Werner Spitz, the noted forensic pathologist, and historian David Kaiser of Carnegie Mellon University. Here's Jerry from Metamora. Jerry, thanks for being patient.
You're welcome.
Hi, Jerry.
Good afternoon, gentlemen. I don't really think that we're ever going to know what exactly happened on that day in 1963. There's just too many unanswered questions. But a couple of points that I would like to make, because I've had some firsthand experience with weapons and being a former Marine in Vietnam. I've seen some things happen that certainly lead one to have to kind of walk the fence on these two different scenarios or theories. One thing for sure, Oswald was an exceptional person. I think that he was a guy that had a mission, and because he had a mission, with his Marine experience, being an expert rifleman.
No, he wasn't an expert rifleman. That's a very important point. He did not fire even a sharpshooter. He fired marksman.
It was marksman.
Yes,
okay,
absolutely.
I stand corrected.
Okay.
Anyways.
This is a point for the conspiracy side, supposedly. But anyway.
Anyways, I believe he was a man with a mission. Well, I guess we'll never find that out. But for people to say that it was physically impossible for him to chamber 2 rounds in a bolt-action rifle and get more than one shot off, I don't believe that.
3 rounds, if we include a bullet which apparently, according to the Warren Commission's initial understanding, didn't hit anything.
Didn't hit anything.
Right.
Okay. I look at a guy like Spuds Webb from the Atlanta Falcons, a little short guy like that. A lot of people would say it's physically impossible for him to dunk a basketball.
Right, the old bumblebee scenario. When loading is too high for it to fly.
Right. If Oswald wanted to do it, I think he could, to be quite honest with you. Another thing that kind of disturbs me about the one-shot theory is that I've seen people wounded. I've seen people get hit with an M16, and an M16, the bullet upon contact is supposed to make a hole not much bigger than a pencil around. Mm-hmm. It's supposed to have a tumbling effect once it hits,
right.
And the hole coming out is supposed to be much larger, okay? That's ideally what's supposed to happen. And
right.
I can remember a particular incident where a North Vietnamese regular was shot at approximately 40 to 50 feet distance on a downhill grade, and the fellow was hit in the left upper corner of the head. The bullet went in no more than about 1.5 to 2 inches, made a 90-degree right-hand turn, and exited, and left 2 small pencil holes, and the guy was alive. According to the people that designed the bullet and the gun, that should have never happened.
Right.
Okay, but it did.
Okay.
I've seen a number of things happen like that with wounds. So to say that one bullet could not have done all that damage, I don't know. But
that's a very good point. By indirection, a very good point. That real life circumstances can confound any predictive theory of the behavior of a projectile. Good point.
One last point about Governor Connolly. Someone called earlier, and they said that something about him holding a hat and possibly he should have been wounded in the wrist or something like that. I didn't catch the whole thing.
Wounded in the wrist.
Okay. I know myself, I was wounded in Vietnam, and I have 3 pieces of shrapnel still on my chest, so this was a deep wound that I had received. I carried 3 Marines and an Arvin regular to a helicopter about 150 to 200 meters away from where I was wounded. I was moving and going for at least 15 minutes before I actually realized that I had 3 holes in myself.
You didn't even know you were hit.
Even though I was hit. And the only way I really...
And that's a larger round, probably, than an M16 round, if we're talking about what they typically use to 7.62.
Okay, I was wounded by a grenade.
Oh, okay.
Okay. And nonetheless, though, I had 3 holes, and I didn't know I was wounded until I felt something running down my side, a warm something which was blood. And up to that point, I'd been moving these guys all over the place trying to get everybody out of that area.
I think you've just documented what Dr. Spitz was saying an hour or so ago. Wouldn't you say, Doctor?
Yes, that's right. The person that's hit is the last one to ask whether he was hit or not.
Depending on where they were hit, depending on the circumstances.
Sure.
Appreciate your call, sir. Very good.
Thank you.
Good stuff. More in a moment on WXYT. Here, and we're coming up to weather time, talking about the JFK assassination with 2 expert guests. The forensic pathologist, Dr. Werner Spitz, recently retired, but even more active now than when working for Wayne County. And Dr. David Kaiser of Carnegie Mellon University, historian, quoted in today's New York Times as one of the, I guess, skeptics about the official account and pointing perhaps toward a mafia involvement. We'll talk more with him in just a moment after weather coming up. We've been with Doctors David Kaiser and Werner Spitz talking about the JFK assassination. Let's talk to Dale from Livonia on WXYT. Dale?
Good afternoon, John.
Hi, Dale.
David, I've got a comment regarding the Oswald shooting and then a question for Dr. Spitz.
Sure.
Regarding the Oswald shooting, I've done 15 years of analysis of the assassination. In fact, I wrote an article that'll appear in Detroit News next Tuesday.
I'll look for it.
Despite all of the connections of Jack Ruby to organized crime, I find it inconceivable that he was motivated to shoot Oswald through an organized crime connection. Basically, based on the way that he entered the basement. For instance, at 11:15, they moved Oswald and brought him down from the 3rd floor to the basement. He was then shot at 11:21. So he left the 3rd floor at 11:15. There have been quite a few books that have alleged that Ruby was tipped off by some inside police conspirators to the exact time of the transfer. Yet, if Oswald left the 3rd floor at 11:15, was on his way down for the transfer, it's a fact that Jack Ruby was almost a block away at the Western Union office, standing in a line to send a money order, which wasn't sent or stamped until 11:17. So, in fact, if Oswald was being moved at 11:15, in other words, the transfer was beginning,
right,
why would Ruby, if he was in a position to receive a tip, which I find inconceivable since he was standing in line, why would he then stand in line an additional 2 minutes and possibly miss his final opportunity to shoot Oswald?
It makes perfect sense to me if your timetable is accurate. Makes
Exactly.
perfect sense to me. It's a target of opportunity, apparently. Dr. Kaiser, you're going to say?
Well, this is a kind of argument from plausibility, which is used in all kinds of fields of history, and which does not impress me that much. What you are assuming is that, the gist of the argument, as I see it, is that if we're assuming that Ruby is acting on orders, then we also have to assume that he can't possibly make a mistake, that he can't possibly be sloppy, that he can't possibly be in the wrong place at the wrong time. I don't see any, even assuming that the account is absolutely correct, which I will assume for the moment, and none of that has to be true.
You see, plausibility is another way of saying probabilities. Which is the more probable scenario?
No, it is not, because it's only another way of saying probability if you think that people act perfectly based on available information.
Now, to put it in a more extreme form, that knock on your door may be Queen Elizabeth and her entire royal retinue, but the probability is that they're not. Now, that it's someone else, someone more likely to be knocking at your door. That it seems to me is the more balanced way to figure out why Ruby did what he did. Do you understand what I'm saying?
I don't see what the analogy would be in the way that you stated it with Ruby's behavior. No.
But the point, David, is that according to the organized crime implication that they motivated Ruby to silence Oswald, allegedly this is Ruby's last attempt or last chance to silence Oswald. Why would he then be standing in a line at 11:17, 2 minutes after Oswald's already on his way down to the basement, when in fact this is his last opportunity? Now, allegedly, the motive would be organized crime tells Ruby, listen, you're going to silence Oswald. If you don't, we're going to kill you. Yeah. So allegedly he's acting under threat of death, yet he waits an additional 2 minutes and, for all intents and purposes, is not in a position to receive a tip from his police conspirators that, in fact, a transfer has begun.
Maybe he got a tip. I mean, this is all maybes, but I don't see that your maybes are any better than mine. This is my point. Maybe he got a tip from somebody in the police department, and we know we had a lot of friends.
All of which presumes...
At 11, and they said it won't be until 11:30, Jack. And maybe he was just lucky.
But that presumes an equality of plausibilities that I don't see for the reasons I've earlier cited. I thought it much more persuasive that Ruby did it on his own for reasons which were intrinsic, not extrinsic.
When did he decide to do it, according to your hypothesis?
Well, sometime over the weekend. I don't know exactly when the plan was forged.
It seems to me just as crazy for him to go take the money order. If he's determined to make things easy for Jacqueline Kennedy, why is he going to take any chance on being away at the proper time?
Well, because he's a hanger-on, and of course the festering idea may suddenly acquire force and weight and physical impact when confronted with the presence of the man himself.
Well, it is possible.
He was always armed. We know that.
It is possible.
Okay.
The question that I had for Dr. Spitz, David, was regards to the JFK back wound.
Yes.
According to the House Select Committee, their photographic panel determined that in analyzing the Zapruder film, that the shot, or the single bullet that struck the president, occurred at approximately frame 196, immediately before they went behind the sign, within a few frames. At that point, the view from the sixth floor window to the president's car was blocked by a tree that lines Elm Street. Now, from what I understand, and Dr. Spitz, maybe you can correct me if I'm wrong based on your analysis, the medical evidence indicates that the bullet that struck the president was not wobbling, was not tumbling. In other words, it had not hit anything prior to hitting the president in the back. If that's true, then do you think, what's your comment regarding a bullet passing through a tree and then striking a president, and understanding, of course, that it was a windy day in Dallas that day? What are the chances that a bullet would pass through a tree, miss all the branches, and then strike the president?
Well, I don't know that I can answer that other than to say that the wound in the back of the shoulder or in the back looked like any other entrance bullet wound. And I cannot imagine if a bullet like that would hit some little thin branches that it would be deviated off its course or in any way changed in appearance. I doubt very much that it would have hit anything but leaves and thin branches, if that. But really, the bottom line is that the wound in the skin looked like any other bullet wound, like you'd expect.
Okay, thanks to our caller. Thank you, sir. Interesting stuff. Got to pause again, Dr. Kaiser. Let me ask you a question before we do.
Sure.
It's been argued...
I have another question for Dr. Spitz. I hope we can get it in before the hour.
Sure, we'll ask it as soon as we come back from the commercial. But before we do, I guess one of the big arguments against Oswald operating as a hitman for the KGB has been that he's so volatile, so strange, so uncontrollable, so weird, and so hard to hold to any kind of coherent plan. You know, he's just the wrong kind of guy psychologically. The KGB would never use him. There's a mini version of that goes to the Ruby scenario and the organized crime scenario, which is organized crime would never use a guy like Ruby because he's too volatile, too flaky, too hard to control. What do you do with that?
Well, then if you're using the organized crime scenario, you have to also ask why they use somebody like Oswald. And Blakey's very interesting on that, too, in the plot to kill the president. Basically, obviously, for either job, they have to use somebody who isn't too obvious. And there is some precedent for this. Now, Ruby actually is too obvious, but, actually, David, I think one of the most fascinating things about it is how willing most of us were to believe the official explanation. And by that, I mean that even if it's true, I mean, my God, if you wanted to design two more suspicious people than Oswald and Ruby, it would be very difficult to do it.
Well, yeah, I'm not sure what you're saying by that.
Well, what I'm saying is that it's another point. Well, what I'm saying is I think it's interesting that there was a kind of what am I looking for? A national tendency to believe that this was just one nut and then another nut who shot the first one.
Right.
And that had to be pretty powerful to become the consensus so fast, even though it could be true. I'm not saying it couldn't be. So I guess that is the answer I would give to your question.
Well, yeah, that's...
And Ruby, you see, there's other evidence. As I said, Ruby was at Parkland Hospital. Ruby, according to one account from Dallas police officers, I think on Friday night, tried to enter the room where Oswald was being interrogated.
Mm-hmm.
So, he was up to something.
Okay, well, we'll have more of this in just a moment. We'll ask your question of Dr. Spitz when we come back from this break. Is there forensic pathologist Dr. Werner Spitz talking about the JFK assassination? Your question, Dr. Kaiser.
Yes. Dr. Spitz, I think you probably know that one reason there was so much controversy over the autopsy and its results was that on the afternoon of the 22nd, the presidential party insisted on taking the president's body back to Washington in defiance, really, of local law and local procedures.
Yeah, that was a big mistake.
Yes. To tell you the truth, I was really going to put you on the spot, since you were a former medical examiner yourself, and ask you how you would have handled that situation if this had been in Detroit.
Well, I don't know that I could have handled it any differently because
you wouldn't have had the authority.
Well, Dr. Rose had plenty of authority. He was a medical examiner in Dallas.
Yes.
The FBI or CIA or whoever they were pushed him out of the way and told him to go and mind his own business.
Yeah.
And so Commander Hume became the man on the spot?
And so they took the body and shipped it to Bethesda from Dallas.
Right.
And once in Bethesda, it was in the Naval Hospital that they did the autopsy by Navy personnel.
So
without
not
training
have much experience with this kind of autopsy.
With no training in forensic pathology. They were pathologists, but not forensic pathologists.
That's correct.
All right, we got to pause again. We'll have more in a moment on WXYT. Assassination Doctors Kaiser and Spitz. Let's not waste time with further identifications. John from Detroit on WXYT. John.
Good afternoon, Dave and
Hi.
Jen.
Hi, John.
I've got a question. Okay, was Oswald's body ever exhumed and, researched?
I think it was.
Because the reason I asked this question is because about 3 or 4 years ago on Channel 9 in Detroit, which is Canadian, they showed a British documentary on the Kennedy assassination, and they compared Oswald's marine discharge papers with the autopsy report. Now, there was a 2-inch difference in height. The eye color was different. There was a 30-pound weight difference. And one of the bodies, I forget which one, had a broken bone, an old fracture.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
It's true there are discrepancies in the records of Oswald as opposed to the man who was arrested. There's no doubt about it.
This leads me to the supposition. Oswald went to Russia, but did Oswald come back?
I think, in fact, I don't remember the details, but I believe that a British researcher actually got an exhumation order, and they checked that out and concluded that it was the same person.
Okay, now this caller, Mel from Westland on WXYT. Mel?
Yes, I was wondering why they don't question Mrs. Kennedy herself, Jackie Onassis, and why they don't question Onassis himself. It seems to me that her, as a person, would be pretty well upset with his Playboy activities while he was in the White House.
Yeah, and where does Aristotle Onassis come into it?
Yeah.
Where? I'm asking you.
Well, I'm saying, I think that it wasn't a short time that she got married to him.
How long? I don't
about
remember.
About a year and a half?
No, 5 years.
Yeah.
Sorry, caller.
I don't think it leads to much, in all honesty. And since time draws short, why don't we get kind of final, well, not final, obviously, but closing analyses from each of you. Starting with you, Dr. Spitz, what's your best understanding of what happened November 22nd, 1963?
Well, it is my belief that the president was shot from the back, that 2 bullets hit him, 1 hit the shoulder, continued into Connolly, and for some mysterious reason, the slug was found not where it's supposed to have been. The second shot hit the head. Both shots came from the back. And I can understand how all this grew over the years, grew and grew because of people's misconceptions based on unfortunate findings released after the autopsy and
incompetence, confusion.
Well, I don't want to call it incompetence, but I want to say that we never hear about the autopsy of Robert Kennedy that was done by a forensic pathologist. There's never any question about what transpired in Los Angeles on that day.
Dr. Kaiser, you got the last word.
Yes, I don't disagree with anything that Dr. Spitz just said. I think that...
30 seconds, by the way.
Okay. We're probably not going to know much more than we ever do. It's a fascinating story. The biggest thing that you learn as you look into it, and particularly the politics surrounding the investigation, is that it just isn't a normal homicide when the President of the United States is killed.
Okay. I wish we had more time.
Okay.
Got to leave it there. Thank you, Dr. Kaiser. Thank you, Dr. Spitz.
You're welcome.